Seleta and Raj, thank you both for coming. Seleta Reynolds is the General Manager of the Los Angeles City Department of Transportation. Raj Kapoor is the Chief Strategy Officer of Lyft, the ride-sharing and personal mobility company. Why don't I just start off with a question I have for both of you. 2 months ago, I was in Tianjin, China, when the Vice Minister of Industry announced that China was researching rules on when to ban the sale of traditional internal combustion engine cars. Will we see a phase out in the United States of traditional internal combustion engine cars probably in the absence of a federal mandate? Seleta, why don't I ask you that first?
Sure. So everybody got very excited about that because immediately after that, Mary Nichols, who is the director of the California Air Resources Board, was quoted as saying that Governor Brown had asked her to research the same question. And my phone started lighting up. Is this real? Could this happen? When? How? What? But, and I don't have an answer to that. But what I do know is that there's clearly political will and political interest in making it happen. And in cities like Los Angeles, we have a mayor, Mayor Garcetti, who is keenly interested in the electrification of the fleet and really aggressively trying to move the market in that direction by rolling out infrastructure to make it possible. So I guess if it had been a couple months ago and you had asked me that question, I might have been more skeptical. But following that announcement, I think it sparked a good conversation. And certainly in cities as large as LA, that's a place where if we made it easy for people to make that choice and enabled it, we might actually be able to nudge some of the OEMs in that direction.
Raj?
So, it's interesting. I think that for personally owned vehicles in the United States, that's going to be difficult, but we're going through a significant change right now, where with the advent of these services like ride sharing, there's a huge movement towards people not owning a car. And it's one of the most underutilized assets that's there. People are using their car 4% of the time. On a network, on a fleet, we can use it anywhere from 60 to 80% of the time. What does that mean for electric? It means that we can get an ROI a lot faster than an individual can, and things that are unique about electric matter to us. So for example, the reliability. In a Tesla, for the drivetrain, there's about 20 moving parts. In an internal combustion engine, there's 10,000 moving parts. So you're much less likely to fail. Teslas now, there are some that are still working well at 500 to 600,000 miles, where an ICE car is about 100 to 150K. So for a fleet owner, we can bring the cost of transportation down, get the ROI sooner. So I think we will be moving in that direction much faster than the consumer or the government will.
I would also just add that I think there are a lot of conversations around shared fleets in the future and autonomous vehicles, and actually mandating and requiring that those shared fleets also be electric. And you've seen that in the taxi industry, for example. City of Seattle mandates that taxis that pick up and drop off from the airport have a certain fuel efficiency, which basically you can only get with an electric vehicle. And so there are other ways that local and governments can kind of influence that shift.
Incentives.
And move it in that direction, right.
Let me change the subject a little bit to the resilience of this new world of electric cars and autonomous vehicles that you're envisioning. We've seen now better part of 2 months since the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, and there's still little sign of a recovery of the grid there. I have some personal experience of this. I was the first New York Times reporter into Tacloban, the Philippines, 4 years ago after Typhoon Haiyan came ashore. The roads were absolutely lined with drowned bodies and in the bushes and in the houses, total devastation. And the grid was completely destroyed. In fact, it did not recover for half a year, which is what we're talking about for Puerto Rico. Now, the first several days we got around because we were able to buy a couple of bicycles that had survived, but then we had to get mobility. And what we did was, fortunately, people had begun siphoning gasoline from destroyed and overturned cars from the storm. And you could buy it for the equivalent of $40 US a gallon in these 2-liter plastic Coca-Cola bottles. And we got a dozen of them, and we rented a Jeep from somebody who was fleeing on a C-130 at the airport, and we were able to move around. If all the cars around there had been electric cars, I'm not sure how we would have regained mobility to go and do stories, for example, in the interior as we did, in terms of what were the relief needs and what was the suffering and so forth in the interior of Leyte Island. So now when you look at even Puerto Rico, a very well-developed place, having this kind of a problem with the grid, are we going to be able to rely on these electric cars and self-driving vehicles in the future in a world increasingly prone to extreme weather?
So I guess I think of mobility like I think of a good stock portfolio, right? It needs to be diverse. You need to have resilience, and you need redundancy. And so it's a legitimate question because there are cars out on the road today that you can't even open without software and electricity, right? You can't even get into the vehicle without those component parts. And it's very, very different than when I got my first car when I was 15 and it was a Chevrolet Citation and I had to jimmy it open every time with a coat hanger, which was, a much simpler time. But I think that your point about, the first couple of days, you had to redefine what mobility was for you, right? You had to rethink what kind of options could actually get you places. There's this famous data from after the blackout in New York City and Manhattan, and after the, I'm just going to use air quotes because we're in California, earthquake in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, where bike share spiked to an all-time high, right? Because people really were using different ways of getting around. And so I think that it's not helpful for us in any disaster when mobility is so binary and it really is just a car or maybe a bike or maybe walking. And so the exciting thing is that the world of personal mobility and the ideas around what that looks like and how people use it are starting to be disrupted and explode. So as we think about having a truly resilient city and one where there is redundancy, we are going to need to think about sourcing electricity from a wide variety of places. If we're going to have a smart grid, how is it going to function during a disaster? Because we all know that in this era, it's not a question of whether there will be a major disaster in Los Angeles. It's a question of when that will happen.
And Raj, what about people who rely on Lyft and no longer even own a car? Should they be concerned?
Well, so, let's talk about self-driving cars in this aspect. It is one of the most technologically complex feats that the human race is taking on. It reduces down to some simple questions that a car needs to ask itself every millisecond, which is, where am I? It needs to know down to the centimeter where I am. What am I looking at? What's going to happen to the things around me that I'm looking at? And then what should I do? And then how do I actuate what you do? That is an extremely complex thing to perceive the world of a dynamic world around it. As a result, the engineering that's going into self-driving cars is more than the engineering that is going into airplanes. It is a harder problem to have a self-driving car work without a driver, without a safety driver, than it is to create an airplane. And as a result, what I've seen is triple redundancy systems, where you have 2 or 3 power packs, you have multiple software systems running on different computer platforms if they fail, and then there's another system that if all else fails, it just knows how to pull itself to the curb safely. So I think what we're going to see from a technology perspective is a significant amount of redundancy and reliability that beats most objects and most technical advances that are out there. Power is a challenge in those cases because we'll even consume much more power in a self-driving car than we do in an electric car without self-driving.
Sometimes I think that because of that complexity, when I hear a story about how we're just going to skip that and go to drones, I feel like it's sort of a cop-out. It's like, this car is just too hard. Let's just get up in the air where nobody is right now.
That does seem like a worry. Well, then, when you talk about that complexity, one of the questions I have on self-driving cars is how much of the brains of those self-driving cars is going to be in the infrastructure, which you worry about at the Department of Transportation in Los Angeles City, and how much is going to be in the car. I've heard from car makers who say, oh, you can't trust the infrastructure anyway, or you might have connectivity differences. I've heard others, particularly those who work with cities, say, no, we want to be doing it ourselves. Why don't I start this time with Raj and then go to Seleta?
Yeah. So we have looked a lot at this problem, and it's clear that the more you put in the infrastructure, the less that you need to put in terms of compute power into the car. Just to give you an understanding, these vehicles today, the average vehicle is maybe $30,000 to $40,000. To put the complete set of sensors and compute and all those things into a car, right now is running probably about $250,000. So that price is going to go down and follow what Tom talked about in terms of the technology curves in Moore's law to do that. But it is a significantly expensive endeavor. But our challenge is that we can't rely on that. We don't want to wait for it, so we are putting it a lot into the car to start. And if there is good infrastructure solutions out there, we can start to do that, but then that solution has to be extremely reliable. Otherwise, we have to have a backup system that works without it, and now we're back to the same cost that we had before in terms of doing that. So I think it's going to be, you're going to see a lot more dependency, especially in the United States, on the vehicle itself because we don't know what's around. There is one piece of infrastructure that is interesting, is that I mentioned before that we need maps. Today, people are using Google Maps and Apple Maps, and that works fine for a human being. But the car needs to know where it is down to the centimeter. So we are, in fact, using the physical world around us, but manifested in a digital way, which is down to a centimeter level map. And the question is, who's in a good position to provide that? In the private industry, we're all creating maps right now, but is that something that we can work with the government to do? Because it's a resource that we all need to use, and it's critical.
They, before the sort of challenge that launched the self-driving vehicles, the work was around smart roads, right? And that was going to be how we were going to get to these safety outcomes. And they built one over this beautiful gorge in Virginia, which still just blows my mind that was where we decided to put this gigantic smart road in the middle of nature. But there it was, and it was a marvel, and it was so exciting. And this was going to be how we were going to do it. And you wouldn't need to tack on a lot of stuff to the vehicle because the road would be smart and the road would direct the vehicles. And very quickly, people realized that if you are going to rely on a pristine state of American infrastructure for a self-driving future, your business plan may not carry water very far. However, most of the companies that are working on self-driving cars, the feedback we get from them most of all is we need more consistency in the way the infrastructure looks and in the way it's delivered from city to city and state to state. And we have some of that because we have national standards, but when there is construction or when there is a pothole or when these kinds of things are happening, then you can't rely on it. However, I think this question about the role of infrastructure and the future of cities and how important it is really valuable conversation to have because just this last legislative session in California, there was a bill that would have allowed companies to hang pretty much whatever they wanted on my traffic signal poles, for example. Now the signals can't use the cloud and can't use cellular because they have to be flawless. There cannot be any lag, right? They have to work in this very real-time way. And so the idea that you're going to start hanging a bunch of things on them that might disrupt or direct the traffic below, and the city would be preempted from having any say in that at all, is a sort of a worrying trend.
Okay, thank you. Well, speaking of cities and how they manage autonomous vehicles, I'm wondering if the rise of self-driving cars is going to help or hurt the cause of extending mass transit in American cities. In Shanghai, I seldom use a car, even ride sharing, because the subway goes everywhere and I'm trying to get my 10 or 15,000 steps a day on my iPhone. So then, if we get a lot of these self-driving cars, will people stop having the interest in building out the subways that many other countries have had? And will we also hurt urban density? Why don't I start with you, Raj, since that's a direct issue for ride sharing?
So our belief is that the consumer is going to speak the loudest here. At the end of the day, the consumer wants to get from point A to point B. And in many cases, it is more convenient for them to use a transit service. It's going to be hard to beat the economics of mass transit when you need to get from a very dense point A to a very dense point B. We can help, as we've been doing, transit agencies around first mile, last mile, because that's a significant problem of people not using transit because they don't know where to park, it's only 2 miles away. We can make that integration a lot smoother, but I don't see it going away at all. I see that there's going to be a burst of modes. You're going to see biking, you're going to see much more walking. We have a service called Lyft Shuttle where we're actually dynamically figuring out where people want to go, and we're telling them to walk each within 5 minutes and creating virtual bus stops and using different occupancy vehicles to get there. So I think what the consumer wants is there to be a blur. And for just get me the best way. Sometimes I care about cost, sometimes I just want speed. But tell me what's the best way to do it. So Lyft's perspective is we need to be in the business of getting people from point A to point B, and it's not just about ride sharing.
So I think there's a healthy tension at the moment between ride sharing and public transit. I sometimes joke that at the moment they're frenemies, right? So, we don't have a lot of data about what kinds of trips are either new trips that are being generated because of the cost and convenience of ride-hailing companies, or where those trips would have formerly been on public transit or biking and walking. So there was some data that came out from UC Davis, a working paper with data from, I think, 5 or 6 American cities, including Los Angeles, demonstrating that there is a little bit of a sort of a shrinking audience on public transit that is moving over to ride-hailing companies like Lyft. Now, I think that what that tells us is that we need to redefine how we think about public transit, because it's critical that cities remain in the business of delivering public transit as a public good, right? They are a lifeline service for most of the people who ride Metro and LADOT transit. And the importance of continuing to do that should outweigh our adherence to the way we've always done things, because clearly people are demonstrating repeatedly that that's not good enough anymore, and not just because transit doesn't go where they want to, but because they're not being treated with generosity and hospitality when they ride transit. And you compare the experience of calling for a Lyft versus waiting for the bus or calling a cab, and it's clear why people are choosing different things differently. But I think that what Raj says is right. There's nothing like high capacity rail for moving people efficiently through cities, and our most precious resource in cities is absolutely space. We're out of it, and we need to find more of it. And I can't have 60,000 autonomous robotaxi overlords trying to pick up and drop off in downtown Los Angeles for the morning commute, right? Yes. An underground subway station is the most elegant and best way of doing that. So how can these new sort of private modes extend the reach of public transit, and how can they solve for not just first last mile, but all short trips? Because 47% of trips in Los Angeles are under 5 miles, and 85% of those are made by single occupant vehicles. And there's a whole audience of people, mainly women and families, that are not well served by a transportation system that is designed for 9 to 5 white collar workers. So there's a huge opportunity that I think the arrival of services like Lyft provides us a wake-up call, but it's only good if we adhere to it.
So one thing I want to just comment on this. Also,
please, everybody, start thinking of your questions. We've got a little time left here, but go ahead, please.
Real quick around, share. This category was born as ride sharing, and what I wanted to share with you, what we've seen is some remarkable progress towards people sharing rides. It used to be like, why would I sit next to a stranger? I'm really worried about that. And so, obviously there's an economic benefit of sharing a ride. There's also less cars, which is something that we care deeply about. It's usually about 30% less in price. So we saw that people started to do it. Why did they continue to do it? They actually liked talking to the human being next to them. It was amazing. They didn't want to look at their phone. They actually wanted to go to the conversation. Sometimes not, but more than not. And so what we've seen now is with the cities where we offer shared rides,
but public transit is no different, so
yes.
Fair.
Where we offer shared rides, we're seeing that 40% of all rides now are shared. So it's grown dramatically, and it's a trend that is, again, it's in the favor of what we're talking about with carbon emission reduction as well.
Very interesting. Let's take a question from the audience here in the front first, please. And I think somebody's bringing up a microphone, but why don't you, oh yes, she's got a microphone for you. Can you pass it to the person in front of you? There we go, thank you.
Sorry, I'm Ashley Hammerbacher, I'm with EcoBalance Solutions. I just had a quick question about the role of accounting for carbon in the decisions that you're making for which ride shares and high occupancy vehicles that you were thinking of using in Lyft or also in the Los Angeles situation. Are you actually accounting for the carbon, measuring it, and actually enforcing that in your decisions? And how do you think about that? Because there's an assumption that autonomous electric vehicles will reduce carbon, but are you measuring that? Is that true? And just wanted to hear your perspective on that. Thank you.
Maybe this one for Raj.
Take it. Yes, so this is something that's really important to us. In fact, we brought on Paul Hawken, who's going to be speaking later as our environmental advisor, and he's been pushing us around this measurement. And one of the things that we're committed to is that we've made this public, that when we deploy at scale autonomous vehicles, it's on 100% renewable energy. So it's not good that it's just electric. Where's that electric energy coming from is really important. So we've started to do that, but honestly, autonomous vehicles are not rolled out yet, so there's not much to measure yet.
Yeah, and I'll just add, the fleets that we control in the city, we are committed to making those 100% renewable electric, and both Metro and the city have recently committed to 100% EV procurement for our buses. So for the fleets we control, absolutely, that's part of the measurement. But the joke that I love from actually your colleague Debs at Lyft is that an electric autonomous traffic jam is still a traffic jam. Ultimately, we have to drive less. It can't just be about the carbon. We have to measure the carbon piece, but we also have to make it so that people drive less.
Okay. Yeah. And one more question here, probably the last question, the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Okay, my name's Hank Tarakovich. Just a fun question to each of you, you too, Keith. In what year do you believe that the autonomous driverless vehicles will be in general accepted legal use across the US? And to be a little less amorphous, here's one criterion when that will be the case in the city of New York.
Raj, you want to go first?
So I think we're already seeing a number of states that have allowed driverless. We're seeing the federal standards that are going through both houses that are moving forward in terms of a national standard. We're years away. It's not decades away. We are years away. I'm sorry? A specific number?
Well, 2021 is the magic number that a lot of people use where AVs will be sort of routine on the streets. But your question is more about when does the whole fleet turn over, right? When is, let's say, 60% of the fleet autonomous and electric?
When it's generally used, and generally across the US, including the city of New York. Not talking about fleets or anything.
Well, when I say fleet, I mean all the cars on the road, right? All the fleet of vehicles on the road.
I'm not saying all.
Sure, so let's say 60%, right? Where the majority of the cars on the street in a city like New York are electric and autonomous. That's more like, I would say, more like 2040, 2050.
My own guess is that you will probably see initial deployment first in the US, but generally accepted faster in China because they can turn over their fleet faster through government mandates. With that, we're out of time, but we have a brief Idea Lab, and then we'll have our next panel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.